The victor's opening remark. "No lawyers needed?" My brother, Jason, said loudly, his sarcastic voice echoing throughout courtroom 3. A few people below chuckled. My father smiled triumphantly. Their lawyer, Richard Lawson, leaned back in his chair with the composure of someone who had already decided the outcome of the match. I stood alone at the defendant's table. No lawyer, no family beside me, not a single whisper of encouragement. Then, Judge Harold Bennett opened the thick file on his desk and looked at the first page. His expression changed. The entire courtroom fell silent. He turned to the second, then the third page. Suddenly, Lawson jumped up. "What's wrong?" Jason asked, still grinning. The lawyer didn't answer. Instead, he stared straight at me. His face was drained of all color. "What the hell is this?" The words automatically slipped from his mouth before he could control them. My father frowned. "What?" Lawson swallowed hard. "Look at her file." Judge Bennett slowly took off his glasses. He looked directly at the plaintiff, uttering a statement that completely shattered any preconceived notions my family had ever placed on me. "She doesn't need a lawyer." 5 seconds later, my father's body collapsed onto the courtroom table. But to understand why that tragedy occurred, you need to know what kind of family I grew up in. The wrong measure. My name is Emily Carter. At the time of the case, I was 32 years old and a U.S. Army officer. To outsiders, I was just a calm woman with a measured voice and a serious demeanor. They see politeness, discipline, and quietness, but they don't see the years that molded that quietness. I grew up in a small town in Ohio. In our house, there was an unwritten rule. Jason is everything. I am nothing. No one said it outright, but repetition taught me this lesson. Jason forgot his chores. He's too tired lately. I forgot. Irresponsible. Jason got a C. School isn't for everyone. I got an A-. Why not a perfect A? My father adored my older brother. He called him legacy, the future, the only child to carry the family name. I was just a daughter, a backup plan, someone obligated to contribute without demanding attention. My mother wasn't cruel. She was just exhausted after years of enduring to maintain peace. Every time my father scolded me, she would just bow her head in silence. At 12, I stopped hoping my grandmother would protect me. At 16, I stopped begging. The only person who truly saw me was my grandfather, Colonel William Carter, a retired Vietnam War veteran. He rarely raised his voice because he didn't need to. He had a look that compelled the other person to tell the truth. At 13, I sat crying alone behind the shed after my father spent 20 minutes explaining why Jason deserved a new truck, and I didn't deserve a scholarship party. My grandfather came over, sat down next to me, and gave me a bottle of root beer. After a moment of silence, he asked, "Do you know why they're wrong about you?" I shrugged. He smiled, "Because they're measuring you with the wrong yardstick." I never forgot that. At 18, I enlisted. My father was furious. "You're throwing your whole life in the trash. You'll give up in 6 months. You don't belong in the army." While my father was banging on the table and shouting, my grandfather quietly stood up. "Ridiculous. You said the same thing to me back then." The room immediately fell silent. That was the first time I'd seen my father give in an argument. The army changed my life, not because it was easy. Basic training was hell, deployments were even harsher. But there, I learned for the first time what fairness was. Effort pays off, achievements are rewarded, discipline is valuable. No one cared whose daughter I was, no one needed to know if my father was pleased or not. The uniform was impartial. Duty had no personal feelings. For over 10 years, I rose through the ranks. Higher rank, more medals, heavier responsibilities. My father almost ignored it all. When I got married, when I got promoted to officer, he changed the subject. When I bought my first house, he asked why I hadn't gotten married yet. Meanwhile, Jason plunged into a series of failures. Business failures, investment losses, broken relationships. Every time he fell, my father rushed to his rescue. Money, excuses, second chances, third chances, then 10th chances. It repeated itself. The day my mother died, the already fragile family bond officially broke. My father became increasingly bitter, Jason increasingly greedy, and my grandfather became my only support. Every Sunday, I called him. We talked about military history, baseball, or sometimes nothing important. Those calls were more precious than gold, because I knew his time was running out. 3 years later, he had a stroke. When I arrived,
the feeling that surged within me at that moment wasn't the triumph of someone who had just taken revenge. It was a vast, icy emptiness. The truth, when revealed completely, rarely brings joy. It leaves behind a desolate battlefield of illusions. I looked at my father, the man who had once been the terror, the only standard in my childhood home. Now, he sat there, motionless and pathetic. At exactly 9 a.m., Judge Harold Bennett entered. The gavel struck, dry and decisive. The verdict is announced. His voice was deep, echoing through the stone walls of courtroom number 3. After reviewing all the evidence, witness testimony, and especially the electronic data and financial records verified directly from the bank, the court finds that the plaintiff's accusation that the defendant, Emily Carter, engaged in manipulation, deception, or undue influence of the late Colonel William Carter is entirely unfounded. Judge Bennett paused, his glasses lowered to the bridge of his nose, his gaze like 2 daggers directed straight at my father and brother. Conversely, the evidence shows that the plaintiff conspired, planned, and manipulated the deceased while he was alive. The late Colonel William Carter's will was made in a state of complete mental soundness, is legally valid, and is absolutely binding. All assets are the legitimate inheritance of Emily Carter. Jason closed his eyes tightly. His hands were clasped so tightly together that his knuckles turned white. But Judge Bennett didn't stop there. He flipped open the second thick file, the file that Attorney Lawson had seen yesterday that had turned pale. However, this case doesn't end with a dispute over inheritance. The judge's words brought the courtroom to a halt. Lawson stood up, about to say something, but the judge's wave of his hand froze him. In the course of our own examination and comparison of the financial documents provided by the defendant, the court has discovered serious indications of criminal activity. The $1.2 million withdrawn from Colonel Carter's trust in 2024, disguised as a business loan for Jason Carter's company, was in fact a fraudulent act of record-breaking, with the complicity and forgery of Thomas Carter's signature. Thump. My father's pen fell onto the table. This file. Judge Bennett slammed his hand down on the thick stack of documents, along with emails discussing the embezzlement of assets and coercion of the elderly, will be sent directly to the District Attorney's Office and the Department of Justice for criminal prosecution in the case of financial fraud and embezzlement. The moment the crown collapsed, everything happened so quickly that no one had time to react. No, it can't be! Jason jumped to his feet, roaring like a cornered beast. He turned and grabbed Lawson by the collar. You said we'd win. How much money did you take from me? Silence! Court police! Maintain order! The gavel struck repeatedly, but my father didn't yell like Jason. He slowly rose, his bloodshot eyes staring at me. It was a look of shock, humiliation, and utter rage. He strode toward the defendant's table, where I stood upright, my hands clasped behind my back in his familiar military posture. You... His voice trembled, hoarse. You knew everything beforehand? You framed me? You want to destroy this house for revenge, don't you? I looked him straight in the eye, not flinching. The distance between us was less than a meter. But I knew we had been in two different worlds for a very long time. "I didn't frame anyone, Father," I said, my voice eerily calm. "I only did what the military taught me. Gather the truth and defend what is right. You and Jason have destroyed yourselves since the day you treated Grandpa's love like an unlimited credit card. You cold-blooded bastard! You're not my son!" He raised his hand, intending to deliver the kind of military slap he used to give me when I was a child. But I, at 32, was no longer the passive 12-year-old I once was. I reached out and grabbed his wrist mid-air. The grip of an army officer made him freeze. "Yes, I am Emily Carter," I said softly, just loud enough for him to hear. "The daughter you said you'd quit after 6 months of service. The daughter who never used your measuring stick to live. Today, your measuring stick is broken." I released my grip. My father staggered back a step. He looked around the courtroom. Reporters began snapping pictures. People around him murmured. The judge looked at him with contempt. The expensive lawyer, Lawson, had already packed up his documents and coldly walked past him like a piece of merchandise no longer useful. The empire of arrogance. The position of the powerful man, always right in the family. Everything had completely collapsed before him. 1 second. 2 seconds. My father's eyes rolled back. He clutched his left chest, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "Thomas! Father!" Jason shouted. But then, on the morning of her court appearance, Emily Carter walked in, not with a thick stack of files like Attorney Lawson, but with only a small, old leather briefcase. The briefcase of the late Colonel William Carter. When Jason scoffed, "No lawyer. You're finished," the camera zoomed in on Emily's fingers. She didn't tremble. She was tapping them rhythmically on the table, a military Morse code rhythm. If anyone could decipher it, it meant, "The prey is in the net." Intriguing detail. For one, the mystery of Judge Bennett. When Judge Bennett opened Emily's personnel file, he didn't just read her alibi. His gaze stopped at a page stamped with a red seal. Project Icarus, Department of Defense. Judge Bennett looked up, gazing at Emily with a knowing look, as if they had known each other for a long time, or as if he had been waiting for this day for a long while. The dialogue sparks curiosity. Judge Bennett whispers, just loud enough for Emily to hear. "Miss Carter, you've brought that battlefield all the way to the civilian court?" Emily replies, "Just to clean up after the war, Your Honor." The audience will immediately wonder, what exactly was Emily's past in the military? What was Project Icarus? Wasn't she just an ordinary officer? In the cross-examination, Emily didn't just prove her alibi with her military schedule. She posed questions that sent chills down viewers' spines due to her masterful psychological manipulation. When confronted by Robert Henson, her grandfather's friend of 15 years, Emily didn't just present the nursing home's entry and exit logs. She approached him, leaned down, and whispered, "Mr. Henson, on April 14th last year, you visited my grandfather for only 12 minutes. The cameras didn't record what you said, but they did record you receiving a yellow envelope from my brother in the parking lot an hour earlier. My question is, did you declare the $50,000 in that envelope for taxes?" Henson broke out in a cold sweat, looking pleadingly at Jason, but Jason turned away. The plot twist to excite the audience. Viewers will realize that Emily didn't just silently endure the past few weeks. She had been secretly investigating, placing surveillance cameras, or had an intelligence network assisting her even before the lawsuit began. The suspense reached its peak when Emily revealed confidential emails between her father and brother. On the projector screen, it wasn't just messages plotting to seize her grandfather's assets. Emily deliberately glanced at a document titled Eleanor Carter's Mother's Medical Record, 2023 Follow-Up Examination. The screen only appeared for 3 seconds, but it was enough to make Attorney Lawson and Emily's father turn pale. Her father trembled and jumped to his feet. Where did you get that? That's not in the evidence catalog." Emily coldly turned off the screen. "Sorry, I clicked the wrong file, but if you want, we can open another case in criminal court next week, regarding why Mother's prescriptions were repeatedly changed a month before her death." A hint to stimulate the audience. Viewers will be deeply shocked. It turns out the mother's death wasn't due to natural illness. Did her father and brother do something to claim the insurance money or the estate sooner? Emily isn't here just because of her grandfather's will. She's back to solve a family murder case. When Judge Bennett announced the case was being transferred to the Department of Justice for criminal prosecution of Jason and his father for financial fraud involving $1.2 million, the father collapsed to the floor. But let the camera capture this moment from a cinematic perspective. As the father staggered, clutching his chest and falling, Emily remained expressionless. She bent down, picked up the pen her father had dropped, and put it back in her jacket pocket. A's paramedics lifted the father onto a stretcher. Jason screamed in panic. Emily walked over to Jason, leaned close to his ear, and said, "Do you know why Grandpa left everything to me?" "Because before he died, he watched the video of you sneaking into his room to find the safe key. Grandpa didn't have a stroke, Jason. He had a sudden spike in blood pressure after arguing with you that night." "I have the tape recording from that night." Jason's eyes widened, and he froze like a corpse as the ambulance door closed. The film ends at the cemetery. Emily sits drinking root beer by her grandfather's grave. Her phone rings. An unknown number with no identification displayed. Emily answers. A mysterious man's voice on the other end says, "Congratulations, Captain Carter. Have you settled your family matters? The task force is waiting for you in Washington. The file on your brother's money laundering operation through shell companies has been opened." Emily looks down at her grandfather's grave, then at her old briefcase. She opens the secret compartment of the briefcase. Inside is a black military-grade hard drive that has never appeared in court. Emily stands up, puts on her sunglasses, and answers the phone. "I'm going to the airport right now. The real game begins." County Central Hospital. Emily's father, Thomas Carter, lay in a hospital bed, his body half immobile from a stroke. Jason sat beside him, his face distraught, his hair disheveled. The door burst open. 2 federal agents in black suits entered, carrying an arrest warrant. Jason trembled as he stood up, roaring, "You're wrong! That bitch framed me! Where did she get those classified documents?" One agent coldly handcuffed Jason, leaning close to his ear and whispering, "Mr. Carter, your sister didn't frame you. She's the head of digital investigations at the Army Intelligence Agency, G2. Your entire shell company system has been under our surveillance for 2 years. Thank you for submitting those emails yourself. Your lawyer, Lawson? He's also one of our agents." Jason knelt on the hospital floor, watching his father moaning incoherently on the hospital bed. It turned out that, from the beginning, their family hadn't been dealing with a rejected daughter, but had instead walked straight into a national trap. Late afternoon. The Ohio Military Cemetery was shrouded in a thin mist. Emily stood before her grandfather's grave, Colonel William Carter. She didn't cry. Her eyes were as cold as steel. She set down the bottle of root beer and opened her grandfather's old briefcase. She pressed a hidden latch beneath the leather lining. A small click echoed. A secret tray popped out, containing a black, gold-plated military ID card and a portable hard drive. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps crunching on dry leaves came from behind. Emily didn't turn. Her hand stealthily reached into her coat pocket, where her Glock pistol was concealed. She spoke, her voice low and even. "You're 5 minutes late, Judge Bennett." A figure emerged from the mist. It was Judge Harold Bennett, the judge who had presided over the trial that morning. He was no longer wearing his judge's robe, but a black overcoat with an eagle badge on the lapel that matched the ID card in Emily's bag. "Judge Bennett, I have to stay and clean up the mess you left in court, Captain Carter. You were too cruel to your family." Emily, smiling coldly. "They were never my family. They were just parasites in my grandfather's name." Bennett walked over to Emily, his eyes fixed on Colonel Williams' grave. "Judge Bennett, your brother's money laundering network is just the tip of the iceberg. Your grandfather, Colonel William, before his death, encrypted the list of traitors in Project Icarus onto that hard drive. That's why your father and brother were manipulated into stealing this briefcase." Emily picked up the hard drive, clutching it tightly in her hand. "They think I'm representing myself in court because I don't have a lawyer. They don't know that the law is the weapon I'm using to publicly defend this hard drive in broad daylight." Ring. Judge Bennett's phone rang. He answered, listened for a few seconds, and his expression immediately changed. He looked at Emily, his eyes filled with tension. Emily, the ambulance carrying your father was attacked on its way to the specialist hospital. Jason has been kidnapped. Someone acted before us. The cemetery fog suddenly thickened and grew colder. Emily slowly put on her dark sunglasses, concealing her emotionless eyes. She tucked the hard drive into her belt and turned to look at the judge. Emily, they're getting impatient. Activate the red notice. The battle in court is over, Bennett. Now it's time to hunt. Emily walked away, her figure disappearing into the thick fog. The intense, dramatic soundtrack played, extinguishing the screen.